Hey everyone. Dark and Darker is an incredibly fun and exciting experience, and if you're new to the game, it can seem a little intimidating and complex. Now, the game is still in its alpha development stage, so many of the more complex and advanced mechanics are likely to change. But this video is going to discuss the basics of fighting and how to deal with some of the more common AI enemies. First off, the one thing that helps set Dark and Darker apart from other first-person melee fighters, like the Elder Scrolls and the Vermintide series, is that both attacking and defending from melee, ranged, or magic is determined by the 3D models. If your sword hits, say, a skeleton visually, your sword will hit the skeleton. Your crosshair is at best a guide for where your attacks are traveling, not something that'll guarantee a hit.
Behind you.
The same is true for shields and blocking, except in one case. Your view while blocking does not accurately show where it's actually blocking. You need to understand that where your shield is in a 3D space and how you're supposed to intercept an enemy's attack. You need to look up to block attacks from above, look left to block attacks from the left, and then look down at your enemies after you've cut them down.
Nice work.
Now, that one exception is when you have a shield in your hand or on your back. If you're not actively blocking with a shield, it won't block any hits or damage. This is not true for shield skeletons, however. Their shield blocks all damage that hits at any and all times. Now let's talk about getting around those shields. Players can be a bit squirrely, so we're just going to talk about the shield skeletons for now. Most of the time, if you're swinging down on their heads, they won't block the attack. But attacks on their shield side are almost always blocked.
You shot him, nice.
It's important to also note that axes have an easier time getting around shields. Mostly because the axe head juts out away from the handle and around the shield, unless they perfectly block it. But let's talk about why this works and how it's useful. Weapons hit according to their 3D model, and the damage you do can be affected by where you hit on the weapon. This is most obvious with two-handed axes. You deal the full damage of the hit with the axe head, but if you hit with the handle, you deal significantly less. This is true for other weapons as well, as you can hit with the pommel of a sword and deal reduced damage, or with the shaft of a mace. It is important to practice dealing your maximum damage on the AI in order to prepare yourself for PvP, as a skilled player can stay as close as possible to an enemy, causing them to hit with their handle, but continuing to hit for their own maximum damage. To do this, you often need to overlook in the direction you are swinging towards. For example, if your attack swings down, you need to look at their belt for the head of your axe to hit their head. And yes, the obvious you may already assume is true as well. Headshots do more damage than body shots, and limb shots deal less damage. Now, you probably also noticed that each melee weapon has its own combo. Some weapons, like the arming sword, the fighter's starting weapon, and the two-handed axe, the starting barbarian weapon, involve top-down chops, which are not only good for hitting heads, but are good for avoiding hitting your own allies fighting close alongside you. Their downsides are that in short areas with low ceilings, they often hit the ceiling before the enemy. Other weapons have wider sweeps, meant to hit multiple enemies per swing. They're a bit unwieldy to use alongside your allies, but they often deal extra damage over the other safer weapons. Speaking of damage, let's talk a little about equipment. Your starting gear is of the lowest tier of equipment, has no additional enchantments. Aside from other players' starting gear, any piece of equipment found in the dungeon or bought from traders will be of at least one tier higher and should be taken over your starting equipment. There are colored tiers that include enchantments as well as a basic stat improvement, but that's a little too deep for our video today, so generally higher damage or better armor is good. Now let's talk about the monsters. All the monsters you will be fighting are undead, which is important for some of the clerical stuff, and they all also bleed, which is good for everyone. Skeletons, of which there are 5, each are just about as dangerous as the next. The footman carries only a sword and has 200 hit points, and will always animate from a pile of bones on the ground, unless he's been aggroed before. The guardsman also animates from a pile of bones, but carries a shield and only has 150 hit points. Next, the archer. He's got a bow, and he'll regularly fire 1 or 2 arrow volleys at his target. He has only 100 hit points, and doesn't lead to shots at all. But unlike the other two, he will be found on patrol walking the dungeons. Finally, the mage. He too also walks the dungeon, and has 200 hit points, and he currently only has 2 spells, Fireball that he lobs at players, and Invulnerability Shield, which blocks all the damage for a short duration, either on himself or another enemy target. Mummies are slower than skeletons, but they make up for it with 250 hit points. They have short range attacks, and they emerge from the ground seemingly out of nowhere. Zombies are probably the most tedious to fight, with 300 hit points and a lingering gas attack. They're usually long fights, and they leave that lingering gas as a persisting hazard. We've got 3 tiny enemies that cause a lot of headache. The spiders spawn out of breakable pottery jars, and although they only have 40 hit points, they're fast and can outpace most of the classes. Dragonflies have 50 hit points and fly around head level to spray poison at players. Death Skulls also have 50 hit points and use a sort of charge attack to hit that is telegraphed with a change of eye color. Mimics also inhabit the dungeon, and their size determines their HP, ranging from about 200 to 300 hit points. They're more dangerous as a surprise than as a monster, as they're probably the easiest enemy to kite. The last mobs I'm going to talk about today are the mini-bosses, who each have 800 hit points. First, we have the Skeletal Soldier, who wields a shield as well as his weapon, and attacks in a sort of combo. He's almost impossible to fight solo, and even with a full party, you're likely to take damage. The Wraith is more dangerous than the Soldier, as he has a lunge attack that makes running and kiting the Wraith very difficult. That dog in the head. There are a few more enemies only found in the Inferno, down those red portals, but they aren't present in the regular dungeon, so we're skipping them for now. What I won't be skipping is talking about the monsters tier. Now, we've already discussed the normal enemy tier, but the elite tier is a faster, tankier, and harder hitting version that also drops better loot. They're rarely found on the normal dungeons and are more common on the high roller maps and Inferno. Nightmare enemies are even faster, tankier, and have even better loot, found only in the Inferno or on high roller dungeons. They also have additional abilities, such as the Guardsman's ability to reflect damage with his shield. Not all of these are implemented yet, but look out for unique behavior. Last thing we're going to cover today is monster behavior. Fighting mobs is much easier if you understand how the AI works. The mobs will generally aggro within 10 meters, and will stay aggroed until they cannot find a path to you. While fighting, their behavior is simple. Melee enemies will walk towards whoever is aggroed and attack them when in range. You can kite melee enemies most effectively by walking into their attack range, walking back out, and dodging their swing. Then you can hit them during their follow-through. Ranged enemies with bows or magic can't lead shots, so circle strafing can often entirely negate all their damage. I hope all that was useful. There's much more to talk about, but with the continued development of the game, we expect a lot of changes that could affect the mechanics of the game and change some of the more nuanced features of combat. But nonetheless, I appreciate you watching all the way to the end, and I'm looking forward to the next playtest of February 6th. I'll have to see you then.